Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources. I'm Stu Reid, your host, and I have a very special guest today, Mr. Noel Hidalgo, who is the Executive Director of BetaNYC, a civic organization dedicated to improving lives in New York through civic design, technology, and data. Since 2009, he has organized BetaNYC as a driving force to improve New York City's use of technology and shares data. Noel, welcome to Community and Technology.
Thanks for letting me be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it looks like we are about to be joined by our co-host, Dave Burstein, as well. So we're all together here. So Noel, tell us a little bit about the background as Dave gets connected. Hey, Dave, we're just starting the show. Good evening. Tell us a little bit about the background of BetaNYC and who you guys are and what you do.
Great. So BetaNYC started off as a meetup. It was actually a PhD project by Haley Cooper-Ryder. She was trying to understand the intersection of technology, data, and open government, and created this little thing called the NYC Open Government Meetup. Shortly thereafter, we met this really amazing city councilwoman who had seen Barack Obama's first executive order on the presidential transparency initiative, the very first executive order that kind of like said open government in open data is what we should ground our governing practices in. We started meeting up and talking about like, what is the opportunity? What could we do if New York City revamped and modernized several of its practices and use digital tools and use data tools at its core. This led to a few-year-long battle alongside with a bunch of good government groups known as the Transparency Working Group, Legal Aid, Common Cause, Citizens Union, Reinvent Albany, where we were finally able to get this little piece of legislation passed called the city's open data law. Then Hurricane Sandy hit, and it was obvious that there needed to be someone fighting for the users of open data, and that this transformative piece of legislation needed to have some community support. And so BetaNYC started hosting a bunch of listening sessions, asking for community input on how technology, data, and design could be used to strengthen our democracy, strengthen our communities, provide educational perspectives and opportunities, economic opportunities, as well as help us build a more inclusive future. Those listening sessions led to this thing called the People's Roadmap to a Digital New York City. You can go to this website, nycroadmap.us, that laid out our organizational mission, vision, and values, and then 34 different policy ideas or proposed pieces of legislation, just really ideas on how to strengthen our democracy. Like let's get the city record online and make it for free. The most important newspaper that New York City produces, that's the city's change log. It's, all the hirings and firings and the salary changes, or what the city's looking to buy, who has accepted those bids and who awarded those bids, or what meetings were happening. All of that was locked away in PDFs. And we said, well, we want this particular website to be compatible with the city's open data law. Let's make that happen. And so BetaNYC eventually took form to be this nonprofit organization that is fiscally sponsored by the Fund for the City of New York. And we run this youth education program with Gail Brewer, where we take CUNY undergraduate students, we put them through a civic boot camp, and we teach them how to become civic hackers. And then we run an annual event as part of Open Data Week, which is coming up. So Open Data Week will be the first week in March. You can find out about all of these amazing events that are around open data at open-data.nyc. And then we sit as the advocates for better use of technology, data, and design within government. And so today, we're a small team of 4 full-time staff members. We have 4 part-time staff members who are CUNY students or CUNY grads. And then we have a new cohort of fellows that just started last week. And so BetaNYC is, a little civic organization just trying to make sure that the wheels are greased for the digital era.
Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating mission, Noel. That really came the importance of data, and I want you to go into one of the expressions that I heard Gail Brewer use when she talked about your work in terms of operationalizing data. The power of that data first came really evident to me when John Liu was the controller of New York City, and he started a website where he laid out all of the contracting and spending of the many, many billions of dollars that the city spends, and broke it down so that we could see the minuscule proportion that went to people of color. And before that, you'd have to figure that out on your own. It was not known, was not published, it was not out there. But that data was, at least for myself and my associates, was empowering to know that, to see that, to be able to actually cite that and to use that as a tool to help unearth funding for Black and brown folks for the city. So tell us a little bit, just kind of, break it down for the maybe folks who don't really know what the heck you're talking about when you say data sets, and how can that work to help everyday people?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an excellent example is just transparency in government financial actions, right? So what you're talking about is checkbook 2.0, and that's the back end, and that's literally the city's checkbook. Where have we written checks and who have we paid? And let's take a look at whether or not we're honoring our commitments to the WMBE programs that are across the city. And are we really being judicious when we say that we want to work with community-based organizations? Let's actually take a look at where the dollars are going. Is it going to a major contractor that's then subcontracting into the community, or are they subcontracting out of the community? Are they hiring our neighbors, or are they hiring individuals who are not our neighbors? I don't want to make it an us versus them situation, but if our tax dollars are being spent, let's make our tax dollars support our communities and not leave us. And so open data helps us look at that type of situation. It also helps us understand what are the problems that exist within our community. 311 data is an excellent example of what we try to get transparency on. There are so many problems and there's so much assistance that's needed. How can we use these data sets to provide insight on what are the buildings that don't have heat or hot water at a time period like this? Where are the problems that people are experiencing noise complaints from commercial establishments that seemingly are not respecting their existence and being in the neighborhood. And so by opening up data, we're able to look at these particular issues. We're able to see systemic problems like sewer backups or noxious smells. And those are things that we can be like, okay, here is an issue. Let's figure out how do we use that within the decision-making process. And so sometimes it's not really straightforward on how data can help everyone's lives, which is why BetaNYC created a thing called radars, which is called Research and Data Assistance Requests. And it's essentially tech support And so if you go to our website and look for radars, like the thing that you use to find airplanes in the sky, if you have a problem and you're a community group and you want some help, technical assistance, we'll help you walk you through the process to identify those issues. But data is it's a sensor. It's a mechanism that we can use to understand things that are not traditionally apparent, but that comes with a huge asterisk next to it, because depending upon how that sensor or that device was created, there may be a privileged class of individuals that are providing that information. And so therefore, there may be a representative bias in that data. And so we ask for open data for the purpose to not only see what's going on in the data sets and all these different systems, but for us to also interrogate and explore what are the biases represented in that data and what's the hidden data inside of that systems, with the aspiration that we can build a more perfect union that supports all of our lives, not just those who are digitally connected or the app was catered to them.
Hey,
can I come in with a question?
Please.
A couple of things I'm working on, and it hits me that you might be able to help. One of them is the question of how many school kids in New York aren't being connected to the internet right now. There's going to be a big FCC hearing about that tomorrow, for example. And I don't know how well New York City is connecting kids. A related problem is I know there's massive waste in the school funding under universal service to connect the schools, but I don't know how to identify where they're spending the money. If I asked you for help on that, what could you do for me for those two questions?
Yeah, I think Chalkboard. So the data is best utilized by people who can help explore these systems. And so Chalkboard NYC is a news website dedicated to education in New York City's public and private schools. I know that they've been running several articles on the digital divide and how many kids are living in unfortunate circumstances where they're not able to attend school. And those are a number of different reasons. There's no cell service, there's no Wi-Fi, they don't have the right devices, their home structures are not conducive for them going to school. And so I would point you to Chalkboard, and I can help try to find some of that data after this radio show. And then when it comes to waste, I think Chalkboard is I would go to them first, and if not them, I would have to have a better understanding of how you define waste. And
so that's my problem.
And work from there.
I've worked with this stuff for a long time. The question I'm asking is, how do I figure out what they're spending money on, how much, and how the bids come in? With that information, I can figure out what's a mistake often, not always, but often.
Yeah, budget data is actually one of the last great frontiers in open data, because so much of it is rooted in some very old school systems, and our city budget comes out as PDFs, which is obviously it's coming out of a database program. There is a tool that is being used to manage the budget, but when it gets presented and uploaded and shared, it's all PDFs. And so, back to Stu's comment, John Liu made some pioneering work to make Checkbook 2.0 on where things were being spent. That has been improved under the current comptroller, Scott Stringer, and we've gotten WMBEs, and we've gotten subcontracting, but we still have some other gaps on like who are the bids, how are the bids coming in, what's the unit cost that people are competing on, and that's kind of like the final frontier. And I hope that we can solve those challenges in this century.
Dave, I certainly understand where you're coming from. In particular, you're looking at, sound like you're starting to drill down on the funding that is being spent for broadband, or supposedly spent for broadband in schools, which I think is a tremendous amount of money. And how much of that is being spent, and where is it being spent, and with whom? Those are some details that would really be great to know.
And there's a lot of stuff going down that shouldn't. Mm-hmm. I know. Mm-hmm. I would lay odds that what they're paying cable companies to hook up kids in shelters is much more than the cable companies are charging in their own programs to help poor kids, for mm-hmm. example. And that's the kind of thing I would be interesting to me, who writes about this kind of stuff, to know where I can get that data. So that kind of thing would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just want to say you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. This is Community and Technology with Stu Reid and Dave Burstein, and very special guest, Noel Hidalgo, the Executive Director of BetaNYC. But before we went live, Noel and I were talking a little bit about something called civic service design and how that's being used to help with the vaccine coordination. Noel, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, civic service design is something that has popped up within the last 8 years. Civic service design is a form of design, and we're not talking about graphic design or illustration. We're talking about what's the way that an object or a service is designed to function. And so, pulling from the definition of the Mayor's Office of Opportunity, civic service design is a discipline to develop solutions that are rooted in insights that are part of our holistic experiences. All of us who are affected by public services, it considers the people, the processes, the communications, the emails, the text messages, and then also the underlying technology as part of the solution. And so we have I like to speak highly of this small studio that exists inside of the mayor's office, because it's really pointing a light at how government services should be delivered in the 21st century. We have a lot of aspirations and we have a lot of injustices that we're trying to rectify within the context of government service delivery. But how should those programs work? What tools should we use? How should we recruit people? And so something that's come out that's a bit troubling is the fact that we have this entity that was inside of the mayor's office that was created by the current mayor. It explicitly challenged to essentially build public services for all of us. And yet they are not at the core team who's helping build the vaccine websites that are having so many difficulties. It's a challenge right now to figure out, like, how do we get our city's best and the brightest to help address, our most pressing issue, which is making sure that people are healthy and can survive this pandemic.
So, I mean, is technology being used to help address this, or are you saying it's not being used? Or I wasn't clear. You're talking about this studio in the mayor's office that's working or not working. What are you saying about that?
The service design studio is an entity that is providing services around the mayor's office of opportunity. So they're working with various agencies, but right now the Department of Health hasn't brought them in, which is kind of alarming. And so right now, you know, we see these websites that aren't reliable, that aren't mobile friendly, that aren't being translated into multiple languages, and it's just kind of like a breakdown of the design process. And it's a shame, because like here we're in the 21st century. We have a mayoral office that's actually dedicated to solving and addressing issues. And we have the single biggest problem that we've seen in 100 years, and that entity is not addressing that particular problem. I think as we talk about the future, and we think about community technology, and with the opportunity that we have with this new mayoralty and a new city council and new borough presidents, is to prepare ourselves to move from the traditional conversations of community technology and say, let's take those same values of community technology and let's now put them into government through civic service design.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the government is open to that? I mean, what's your sense of the feasibility of that? I mean, it sounds great, but can it happen?
I hope and pray that it can happen.
Okay.
That's like, I think it'll happen when we demand that, our technology and our government services, particularly our digital services, work for us, mm-hmm. right? Like we ask for our streets to be paved. We ask for our sidewalks to be cleared, our trash to be picked up, for the police not to kill us. Like we ask for very explicit things. And we should be asking and demanding that the technology services that are at the core of government service delivery work for all of us. On top of that, we should be asking that, materials are presented in accessible ways for people who have limited sight vision or speak different languages. But these are things that we have to be demanding from our city council and from our mayor's office, so that way those services, they can prioritize those things, because right now they're not being prioritized. And that's a very frustrating place to be in the middle of this pandemic.
I saw that you recently testified before the city council about so-called smart cities. And, it sounds like this city is not so smart when it's coming to utilize technology to service people in this pandemic. What's your assessment of smart cities, and where is New York City on that continuum in terms of making it happen?
Well, I think New York City is a smart city because of its people, not necessarily because of its technology. Mm-hmm. The smart city is really a marketing terminology that's being used, just like cloud technology. These are things that are branded in such a way to get city to buy new technology. And in the testimony that the BetaNYC provided, as did several other good government groups like NYCLU, and STOP, is that we need to be really careful about technology adoption, particularly as it's being sold through the narrative of the smart city. At the core of the smart city is a lot of sensors. There's a lot of connectivity and a lot of sensors. And at that root level, you're talking about microphones, cameras, measuring devices, scattered all throughout the city, inside of your trash cans, on top of lamp posts, at subway stations, on buses. And what happens when you kind of diffuse the city with all of these different sensors, is that you have a potential for privacy violations and ethical violations. And we have already seen how facial recognition discriminates Black and brown people and women, and particularly Black women. And so, it just misreads their faces, and consistently, time after time after time, the technology improves. But at the same time period, when you look at how facial recognition technology is being used, it's being used to amplify our over-policing as it is. So the smart city as a grand idea would be great if it could take into consideration privacy, ethics, consent. Like, do you want to be able to walk into a place and all of a sudden your Wi-Fi ID and your Bluetooth ID is being combined with your online profile without you knowing it? And so the testimony that we put together helps articulate that New York City should be governed by a set of values when it comes to adopting tools inside of smart city government.
I certainly agree with that. We've had Albert Fox-Khan and others on this show talking about the whole surveillance initiative that sometimes out front, sometimes kind of hidden, like you're saying, and so much of the AI as well. Back to your earlier point, when you have an elite class or a privileged class or just a narrow class of folks, and in this particular case, white men, designing so many of these applications and paradigms, they end up discriminating. It's just by the very nature they perpetuate the perceptions and misperceptions that they already have, and that is certainly one of my fears as well. I share your concern. Some of the work that I'm doing with my group, we have started something that we call a smart community initiative, where we have where the community folks are using technology to service their needs, and more of a bottom-up approach. And I think there's some utility in that, and we're getting some good feedback from folks in the community that are actually driving the whole initiative. It's not us as some techie guys who look at this. No, it's the people on the ground saying, "Oh, I need to know about what's going on over here. I need to be able to monitor my lobby. I need to be able to know what's going on with the trash. I need to know about what's happening in my neighborhood. How can you help with that?" And I think when it comes from the ground up like that, and when you have the folks on the ground actually controlling the technology as opposed to, the top down, I think maybe you have a better shot at having something that actually services the people as opposed to surveilling the people.
Absolutely, because you speak about education, and education is empowerment, right? When you know what's going to happen to you, you can speak about it, and therefore you have you are being granted the freedom to choose or deny that thing instead of it being imposed upon you. And I think this is very much at the core of like where the smart city should be. It should not be a sales pitch, but should be a long conversation about empowering communities to understand exactly what's happening to those communities through these potential tools.
Okay, this is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. I'm Stu Reid and Dave Burstein. We're with Community and Technology. And we have Noel Hidalgo from BetaNYC talking about technology in service of civic engagement and community empowerment. Dave, I see you, looks like you're kind of noodling around there. Do you have something that you want to throw at Noel?
I wince when I hear the term smart cities, because to a certain extent, a smart city, as it's being developed around the world, and I report a lot on China, is probably report more on China than I do of New York, because there's more interesting things happening there. But the definition of the smart city turns out to usually be how well and how thoroughly they are watching you. Mm-hmm. And that, more than anything else, has been part of the move for smart cities. It's also a totally meaningless term. It's a marketing term that's thrown at any kind of automation or technology that they're trying to sell. And I see lots of that. But let me change the subject a little bit, because we've been throwing out a couple of names here. And it's rare in this stuff that you get to compliment the politicians. Most of the politicians let things go by blindly. Stu, you know Gail Brewer. She's turned out as borough president, but I believe she's running for her old city council seat. Is she somebody who's been constructive in technology fields? And then I'll ask Neil to come in on that question.
I would say absolutely. I remember when Gail started the technology group, advisor group within the city council. This is going back probably a good 15, maybe 20 years ago. And she chaired the technology committee. She started it and chaired the technology committee within the city council, and was a very early advocate of community control, of bridging the digital divide. And she helped our group tremendously, and just in terms of moving our effort along with the public housing community, where we tend to focus our work. She has been a tireless advocate. She helped fund a number of our initiatives. She has spoken at virtually every webinar or a conference we put together. She's been a champion of emergency preparedness, which is something else that we've been doing again since Hurricane Sandy. With City College, we started the WHCR emergency broadcast team that gathers information from the community using community-based technology tools to communicate with each other and to feed back to the radio station, so that we can in turn share on the ground information about what's happening in our communities. And Gail's been a big champion and supporter of that. So she's very high up on my list. You know, we gave her an award at our last one of our last events, as a matter of fact, just in recognition of the support that she has shown for myself, my partner Doug Frazier, and the work that we've been doing. She's been helping us for over a decade, probably closer to 20 years. So I think very highly of her. And she's, it's not just me. Everywhere I see her, people know her and are on a first name basis with her. That's really rare for a politician. And not only are they first name with her, but she knows who they are on a first name basis. And she's I don't consider her a politician. She really is a civic servant in my mind. I don't know what Noel's thinking is, but she's a very special lady.
No, you happen to mention her, and I suspect you're dealing with a number of other politicians who deserve a call out or a shout out. Who's been doing good work that you've seen that doesn't get appreciated?
I don't think, to echo Stu's statement, and Dave, I can only imagine what undercurrent simmering compliments you want to give Gail, but Gail has been a phenomenal civic leader around not only about community, but technology itself. I met Gail as a councilwoman who was the chair of the technology committee, being entrepreneurial and saying, hey, we can do things different here in New York, and let's get this open data law passed. Gail has also been instrumental in helping shape and support really the creation of our Civic Innovation Fellows program with CUNY students, and figuring out how to build a pipeline so that way future civil servants have their perspective rooted in technology. And Gail BetaNYC actually runs the Civic Innovation Program out of her office, and Gail was instrumental in saying, look, you need to address some very key problems that I'm facing as a borough president. And those are data and technology literacy for community boards. And so for the last 7 years, BetaNYC has not only focused on training these young people, but making sure that the city's open data program has like a complementary workbook and curriculum around open data. And then we work with community boards and deliver that data literacy, and we build tools for community boards based upon the real world use cases that we're exposed to out of the borough president's office. And you can find all the open data tools in our curriculum on beta.nyc. But as you mentioned, Dave, there are some really entrepreneurial council members and other borough presidents that are out there. Eric Adams for a while was trying to build a borough stat around housing, which is something that we're still working on today. BetaNYC is kind of working with the Housing Data Coalition to take a look at a bunch of different housing data sets to ensure that people that we are aware of the different types of housing court decisions and the problems that are out there. The ANHD, Association for Neighborhood Development, has really led the way on building some of these tools for housing data. Ben Kalos, I love Ben Kalos. I mean, we have a true civic hacker as a city council member right now. Ben and our paths first crossed when he was making a website to scrape legislative data at the state. And I happened to be working at the state Senate and was building a legislative database that was easy to use. It's now called Open Legislation. It's part of the state Senate's website. You can subscribe to notifications, and you can petition your senator and your assembly member all from one website. And Ben was building more or less a competitive product at the same time period. I mean, he really understands the technological nuances. Mark Levine also is a very, very digitally literate. Carlina Rivera has pushed for better use of data and understanding things. John Liu, Keith Powers, they're all like I mean, even Justin Brennan was out in Bay Ridge, has been asking for better transparency around contracting data and how we could possibly be using these things. It's great that we have kind of literate council members who are at the forefront, but we always need more of them. And we definitely need more technologists, more developers and designers inside of a government.
I should make a point of saying that while we talked about Gail Brewer and the work she's done and why we respect her, this radio show, this station, does not endorse candidates. We may individually do so, but that's not what we do on the radio. I actually don't know Gail that well, as you guys do, which is why I threw that question out. Now, what should be changed in New York City's programs today? We're in 2021. There's a few big issues that may override the data things, but what should be looking to change in how New York City does this work?
I feel like I should be asking both of you based upon your experiences. My first answer is we need procurement reform. So much of when it comes down to technology and issues around technology is that we buy computing and computing systems in the same way that we buy trash trucks, police cars, and modifications to our public buildings. They go through a very long-winded process. It's a capital process, and the technology that we're buying for city government is designed to last for 10 years. 10 years ago, we were just getting comfortable with app stores. Like 10 years ago, we were redesigning all websites to be mobile friendly. Now, pretty much like 94% of New Yorkers have a supercomputer that is a mobile device in their pocket. Not only is it just like the architecture of that, but it's also like understanding the implications of how these things are bought, and they need to adapt to the 21st century. There's this thing called automated decision-making, ADS, which is about algorithms. And if you've had Albert on the show, he would probably be talking about it. The ADS, automated decision-making, it's about using machine learning to make decisions within government. We have that in regards to NYCHA housing. We have that in regards to school selection. We have that when it comes down to bail decisions. And what's crazy is that within our procurement contracts for ADS, we don't have real accountability control inside of those different systems. And so we need to ensure that our procurement process, the way that we buy, essentially these various systems, have really clear accountability frameworks and transparency frameworks, so that way we don't get screwed over and injustice doesn't just get replicated for the 21st century.
Did you just say or imply that when the city buys a system like that, we should know what the algorithms are so we can see how biased they are?
Yes, absolutely.
And do you see that actually happening out there in how the city buys these things?
Well, that's actually been one of the most recent fights in the last few years, is getting greater levels of transparency. So from the procurement side of things, procurement is such a messy kind of like mud pit. Is that, Dave, you were talking about procurement issues and trying to understand what's been purchased and how money's getting spent. Well, we don't have a really clear understanding of all of the computing systems that the city has. The last citywide audit of government technology computing systems was done in the summer of 2001. And so we're flying blind for the last 20 years of a comprehensive understanding of the technology systems that are introduced, which is why we get C3, we get Cyber Command, which is, cutting edge for the work that they do. They're setting out and saying, we don't know all the computing systems, but here are the ways that we're able to audit the computing systems that are out there. But if we don't know what are the computing systems that are out there, we don't know what are the automated decision-making systems that have been purchased and therefore that are providing justice or injustice or decisions onto our lives. And so if we can reform the procurement practices, there's a whole daisy chain of issues that we would hopefully be able to address.
Yeah, no, I think Noel's hitting it right on the head. You got to look at the money, and where's the money moving? Who's controlling the money? And my big issue is that when you talk about reforming the procurement process and shedding some light on it, looking at giving it some transparency, how do you involve folks on the ground that are the actual recipients of services? How do you involve them in ownership of the delivery of those services? How do you help fund them to actually improve their own lives? That's one of the big things that I've learned working in public housing. I grew up in public housing. I'm not from New York, but I grew up in public housing in Cleveland. So I know about public housing. And myself, my partner, Doug, we've been working in New York City public housing with technology issues for over 30 years. So, you know, we've learned a lot, and most of what we've learned have come from the residents themselves. So, you know, I would like to see some way that residents could be funded to implement solutions to a lot of the problems, not just technology, but other solutions as well. You know, when you visit public housing complexes, often you see a group of white guys marching through the development, and invariably they're contractors. These are the guys that are getting the money to fix the boilers, to mitigate the lead, to paint, to do whatever. And they're outsiders. I remember going to a bidders conference, this is going back about maybe 15 years or so, around cameras. When the public housing put out an RFP for cameras, quote unquote surveillance cameras. They had a bidders only conference. I went there, and there were probably, I counted, there were about 70 people there, and there were 3 folks of color. And most of the white folks spoke with an accent. They weren't even American born. Not that I've got any beef with them, but these were immigrant folks, God bless them, but they get moved ahead of the line in front of the Black and brown folks who, you know, helped build this country, whose blood, sweat, and tears are responsible for us being who we are today. And so that whole process is upside down, you know, in my mind. You know, and, you know, I don't want to cast aspersions, but, you know, there's a lot of corruption. You know, when we put in a bid for that particular camera service, all of a sudden they said, oh, we pulled the bid. We're not doing it now. We decided we'll do it later. Well, a year later, we found out that they had snuck it back out there, didn't tell us, and, you know, gave the contract to the usual suspects. And, you know, that's just one small example of, you know, how corrupt that is. And again, it's services presumably to benefit the folks, poor and low-income folks in public housing. But you got outsiders. Well, first of all, the outsiders even define what it should look like. And, you know, we have problems with that. You know, Dave, you know about the service that we provide. The video cameras that we provide are actually controlled by residents, and they're able to actually view the images themselves. They're in charge of the cameras. The system that the authority puts in are only seen by the development management and by the police. And they're reactive, they're not proactive. They wait until somebody gets hurt. Oh, once you get bopped in the head, oh, then they'll go look and see if they can find the footage and apprehend who did it. Well, that's not really working in the public benefit as the services that we put together. And I say we, this was a public housing leader. God bless him, he just passed away this past year, John Johnson in Mount Haven in the South Bronx. He was the one that came up with the virtual tenant patrol, telling us that the residents needed to see on their phones, on their tablets, what's going on in their community. So, you know, even the very solutions that get bidded upon, that get procured for, the recipients are left out of defining what that is. So I agree with what Noel's saying about that has to be totally reformed, and I'd really like to see it turned around where the actual recipients of goods and services are part of defining what those goods and services are, and also part of the delivery mechanisms actually get funded to help deliver those goods and services. That would be transformative. Yeah. New York City is the biggest spender in the whole state of goods and services. I think it's $3 billion, not counting all the stuff that they spend on the school board and all that stuff. I'm talking about outside purchases of goods and services, many billions of dollars. And that should be going to help uplift the actual residents of the city.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave historical context, this administration has been frustrating. This de Blasio administration has been frustrating in a couple of different ways. The CTO's office, the chief technology officer, launched a program. This is like 2 CTOs ago, called a Collabs project, NYCX Collabs. And the first 2 collab projects were in Brownsville. The first one was, how can NYCHA residents help remove organic waste from their own trash and turn it into composting materials, so that way they can garden on their own soil, and they can garden in their neighborhood. The second one challenge was, how do you create innovative lighting and community engagement, so that way there's safe and thriving nighttime corridors, because that was the one thing that they found out from the young people in Brownsville, is that because there had been an underservice of building of street lights, they didn't want to have kind of these superimposing NYPD, like these massive floodlights that are really undignified and inhumane, like they're loud and they're super bright, and they're just, I see them put on buildings and it's like they're flooding the lights, and apparently the NYPD thinks that that's a safe way. I think it's just a really inhuman way to provide safety. So Collab said, hey, how do we reduce the organics waste and give people a real connection to their soil, and how do we come up with lightweight lighting, and they went through a whole design process, engaging the community, surveying them, and asking them, what are the problems, what are the solutions, how would we go about this, how do we bring you into this conversation, and sadly, the Collabs process has only done 4 challenges, and it's been an underserved framework to addressing real community problems where there has been a traditional underserving of community needs. I wish the next administration figures out how to make these NYCX challenges, and build with the community for the community.
Yeah. Absolutely. Here. Okay, Dave, we're just about out of time. Do you have any final comments or questions for Noel before we wind up here?
Well, I just want to thank Noel for coming on the show here and the kind of work he's doing. There is that enthusiasm. There's an amazing number of people trying to do the right thing inside government. And how you make that happen is something that I don't have a good answer for, even after decades of watching government. But I'm very glad to support it when it happens.
Okay, I would just like to echo those thanks, Noel. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for the work that you do. BetaNYC is doing some really important stuff, and I hope you'll come back on the show again and continue to share your work and your effort with our audience.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to join some community elders who've seen kind of like all the different permutations of technology over the last few decades. So thank you for inviting me and thinking that I was worthy enough to be in your presence and to talk about the work that we're doing at BetaNYC. My last parting promotional response is, if you're interested in understanding more about open data classes and the work that BetaNYC does, if you are a community-based organization and you need help taking a look at a data or technology problem, if you're a community board member, if you're an elected official, take a look at our website, beta.nyc. Look for radars or open data classes. We are here to help get you connected and address your issues. We're grant funded, so it shouldn't cost you any money. We have a bunch of CUNY students that are going to be rolling out an open data education program through our Open Data Ambassadors program, was part of MODA and the Queens Public Library. So those classes are going to be coming up and starting in March as part of Open Data Week, open-data.nyc.
Great. Dave?
And one thing that I'm going to throw at you after the show, what neighborhoods are getting 5G at speed? Because I had a map from T-Mobile, and guess what parts of the city were getting covered? And I know the same is true from Verizon, and I'd love to be able to prove that. It's hard to get that data.
Okay, well, that's something to talk about on our next show. Okay, well, thanks again, Noel, for coming on to Community and Technology. We've been speaking with Noel Hidalgo, the Executive Director of BetaNYC. I'm Stu Reid and Dave Burstein. This is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. See you next week. Thanks. Okay.